I was right. Okay, so guys, Steve just got in. My analysis of Steve came out earlier this week, which explains both the history of Minecraft and the elements that people said were both working for and against Steve's inclusion in Smash. You can check that out by looking at the link in the top right-hand corner. But now that Steve is in for sure, we can take a look at some of those points under a microscope. Steve's inclusion has a lot of really interesting ramifications, and re-examining the points that I made in that last video are going to help inform better speculation for Smash going forward. So let's just get into it. First off, let's talk about Microsoft emojing. So Steve was originally created as an indie character by Marcus Persson, aka Notch. Being created by literally just one person in a super small project and company means that there was no doubt that at one time Steve was an indie character. That said, in 2014, Microsoft purchased the company and started funding Mojang. Now, largely people interpreted this one of two ways. First off, people wanted to argue that because he originally started as an indie game, he was totally disqualified from being in the game. But at this point, there is no denying that Nintendo isn't turned off by indie games, which is great news for you Shantae fans out there. They've worked with Cuphead, Undertale, Shovel Knight, and now, depending on your perspective, Minecraft, which at the very least qualifies as an indie game in its origins. Now, the other now debunked point that other people tried to bring up is that Microsoft allowed Banjo in the game, which means they gave up their slot to any other Microsoft-owned characters in the Fighter Pass. Now, I explained this a little bit in my past video, but this was always a shaky point that is now totally destroyed. With both Steve and Banjo getting into Smash, we can see that Nintendo isn't afraid of letting multiple characters from the same company join DLC. I get into this a bit in my video from last week, but it's really important to realize that even though sometimes publishers under a larger parent company seem heavily connected, they almost always act very independently and are very likely to be handled entirely separately from other collaborators like Nintendo. Check out my previous video if you want to see the explanation on that. In my opinion, this may also bode very well for those of you who want Master Chief to be included into Smash, but who knows. Next, I want to address the public statements that people seem to have read into. First off, we now know that tweets from low-level employees really can't confirm or disconfirm. Or at the very least, the standard needs to be a lot higher. As I said before, people were really reading into a lot of different tweets, especially this one by Aubrey Norris. But in general, I think that we just need to dismiss any statements that happen over Twitter unless they're from the person in charge of decision-making outright saying that the character isn't happening. And even then, things can change given enough time. We need to be very careful about the source that we're getting our quotes from, especially when it's coming from people on Discord, which people were actually trying to pull before. When making speculation, we really need to be looking toward official statements and sources rather than trying to read between the lines at ambiguous tweets, casual remarks, or Discord posts. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see with current Smash speculation. This also means that while I think tweets from people like Aubrey Norris weren't meaningful, I also still think that the Xbox Game Pass tweet also didn't particularly mean much, and that Vergibin's leak from years ago probably wasn't right because so much time has passed. But let's talk about Steve's merit as a character real fast. People said that he had no personality. They said he'd be too blocky and janky. They said he'd have no moveset. I don't know, in my opinion, every single one of those arguments for any character at this point should be immediately dismissed. He is just an avatar and he doesn't have a personality, and he still got into the game. He does look blocky and he does move janky, and he still got into the game. In fact, not only did he get in, but they didn't even try to make him look smooth. They just embraced the clunkiness. He does have a seemingly simple moveset to pull from at first glance, but not only did he still get into the game, but he looks super unique and creative. In the end, none of these ended up working against Steve, which only cements the idea for me that Sakurai can make just about anyone work. And speaking of Sakurai, that guy is an insane builder. Seriously, check out all the stuff he created in the game that they showed off in that direct, and all in survival mode as well. I haven't been able to put down Minecraft since I played it for the first time getting footage for that last video, but I can't blame Sakurai. This game is great, and it's clear that he loves Minecraft and has likely spent hundreds of hours in the game. That said, despite his love for the game, it sounds like he was still a little hesitant to put Steve into Smash. Whether it's worried that he wouldn't be able to do the game justice, or he was a little iffy on how he would implement Steve, I think that Sakurai's love for Minecraft will ultimately really help Sakurai's authenticity when implementing a franchise that he loves so much. This also gives us a few interesting glances onto how how Sakurai chooses a character. As he said before, it sounds like Nintendo approaches Sakurai with a character idea, and then Sakurai either accepts it or vetoes it depending on whether or not he thinks he can implement it. Unfortunately for Geno fans, this sounds like Sakurai himself might not be the one actively coming up with character suggestions, and that his personal opinions might not actually shape the initial picks, but rather the implementation of those picks that Nintendo presents to him. Another point of interest is that even if Sakurai were to think that a character would be impossible to include, Nintendo could eventually overrule him or whittle him down or whatever they did for Steve. I also think that it's worth noting that this seems to have lined up perfectly with a Minecraft Live event. In the past, I had assumed that any sort of lineup with company events was likely a coincidence and not something that was planned. However, now it seems like Nintendo very intentionally scheduled the Direct to line up with the Minecraft event, which is really interesting to note. They've shown that this isn't always a priority for them, but it might lend weight to the argument of a character being included when a significant event is about to happen. I have also heard many times that Nintendo would never put Steve into Smash because there are too many people in our dedicated fan community who would be outraged. In the end, I don't think that this argument held nearly as much weight as certain fans may have hoped. Steve was definitely a choice to appeal to everyone and not just the dedicated community, but the millions of fans out there who love Steve and love Super Smash Bros. Mutually. What is clear above all else is that Sakurai is super creative and definitely willing to find something that appeals to his fans. Although we saw in Last Pass that Nintendo may have struggled to find the right balance of building up hype through the whole pass, we can only hope that this pass just continues to get better and better. If you want to see my other character analyses besides Steve, click the playlist on the left to watch those breakdowns. Click the video on the right to see which of my videos YouTube thinks would be especially to your liking, and make sure to subscribe if you want to see more of my content. I'll see you guys on Sunday with another final analysis video. Stay smashing.